I do have a little bit of news. Unfortunately, or fortunately for some, this will be my last podcast. This is episode 257. I've done 86 episodes of this show, and I will be handing over the reins to you, Jeff.
Jason, it's a pleasure to be here.
The Business of Betting podcast is presented by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming industry. 4 out of the top 5 U.S. operators personalize player experiences with Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming industry. Learn more about Optimove by requesting a demo at optimove.com/businessofbetting. And if you like what you see, you will get your first month free.
What is up, everybody? I am Jason Trost, the host of the Business of Betting podcast. We have a special episode today with Jeff Edelstein, who is a columnist at InGame. Welcome to the pod, Jeff.
Jason, it's a pleasure to be here. How are you today?
I am not too bad. How are you doing?
I understand that you may have a little bit of news to tell us here, huh?
I do have a little bit of news. Unfortunately, or fortunately for some, this will be my last podcast. This is episode 257. I've done 86 episodes of this show, and I will be handing over the reins to you. I took over this show from Jake. Too many J's on this.
A lot of J's. It's the rule. You have to have a J. Otherwise, you're not even going to be considered.
So Jake Williams did such a great job launching this podcast. I took it over, and I can't believe I've been doing this for over 3 years now. Very proud of that we've done 86 episodes and talked to everybody in the industry, and it's been fascinating. And I'm very much looking forward to see what direction you take. So why don't you start to introduce yourself to the audience? What's your background and what are your ambitions for the podcast?
Yeah. So, hi, I'm Jeff. I've been working with InGame now for a little bit over a year. Before that, I was with Sports Handle covering the industry. Previous to all that, I was a newspaper columnist for about 25 years with the Trentonian in Trenton, New Jersey. I also do talk radio on New Jersey 101.5. I was on the New York Fox affiliate doing TV stuff for them for a long time. So I got my toes pretty well entrenched in the media world. And as far as like the sports gambling business goes, it was a little bit of a accidental introduction to it, quite frankly. I've been playing daily fantasy sports I've been playing fantasy football I date myself here. My home league started in 1986. And so this is our 40th year. I'm currently in first place, so, I won't bore people with more details on that. But yeah, I was playing daily fantasy sports, from like 2014 on, and Roto Grinders was like the premier, site for all the information there. And I, because my ego is outsized, I decided just to reach out directly to Cal Spears, the founder and CEO there, and say, hey, man, I want to work for you guys. And Cal very calmly, patted me on the top of my head and said, we don't have anything for you right now, but stay in touch. It was one of those deals. And I did. I stayed in touch. I ended up being tapped to edit Adam Levitan's from Establish the Run, his Skin to Fur ebook. I edited that. And then I went back to Cal. And, Levitan, he's a big name in the business, right? So I went back to Cal. I was like, hey, I just edited this book. Cal's like, let me see what I can do for it. So Cal puts me in touch with Adam Small, he had started US Bets, who put me in touch with Brett Smiley, who was editing Sports Handle. One thing led to another. Started doing some freelance work. And then I kind of fell into just covering the industry. I wanted to, what I kind of set out to do was say, hey, I think, David Johnson is a smash play at 8,900, but me and 20,000 other people were doing that. Not a lot of people were covering this industry. And so Brett and Adam gave me a chance to do it. And I just kind of ran with the ball, pun intended. And I was working with Better Collective for a while doing that. Then I made a jump to Newsweek, trying to get their, sports betting stuff off the ground. And then when Adam and Cal started Third Planet, that was a no-brainer to go work with them.
Very cool. We have some things in common. I used to do radio in college, so I had a little bit of radio. I was, a student disc jockey, so I wasn't on the real radio. I was on WNUR out of Chicago. But I loved it. I loved talking to the microphone in the middle of the night. And I used to live in Yardley, so our paths may have crossed a few times.
When were you in Yardley?
I'm dating myself now, but late 80s. I was in Yardley. I did a piano recital in Trenton. Does that count?
It counts. Yeah. I mean, that's, big piano town.
Yeah. My dad worked at, I was trying to make it a big piano town. My dad worked at Bristol Myers Squibb down the road. So he would take the train in Trenton all the time. And so, yeah, went over across the river a lot of times. Small world. So, from your experience as a newspaper columnist, you might have to tell the kids these days what a newspaper was, but what's your vision for the podcast? Let me start with my vision for the podcast. I think Jake, he liked to interview insiders and like let them tell their story. My vision for the podcast was sports betting is a massive, massive industry around the world, but very few people, for as big of an industry as it is, very few people understand how the sausage is made. So I try to, anyway, focus on the behind the curtain, how people actually make their money, how the different companies interface with each other. So we've had a bunch of B2B providers on here, like where does the data come from? How are odds made? Where's the actual revenue model in sports betting? So my goal with this podcast was trying to show the audience this is how the actual sports betting comes together. Do you have a particular spin that you're thinking about from sports betting? What spin you would like to bring to the business of betting?
My short answer is I'm not sure yet. Okay. And if I'm being perfectly honest, I want to like take some of the stuff that you've done. I want to take some of the stuff that Jake done, obviously. Having said that, we're not alone out there when it comes to podcasts and, written articles. And there's a lot of, how do I set it apart? I think I'm going to try to set it apart much in the same way that I try to set my writing apart. Right. And that has always been like, I'm much more interested in what somebody had for breakfast. I'm much more interested on what their Spotify playlist is showing, these days. So while I want to get into the nitty gritty of how this business is interfacing with this business, how this better, is finding their edges, I don't know, as a listener, as a reader, as a consumer, I feel like that this industry, there's, partly because it's the job for like the bettors to stay like kind of hidden, and partly because, the CEO types don't want to like put themselves out there that much. But I feel like for a business and an industry that is just obviously chock full of personalities, very few people out there have allowed their personalities to come out and be shown, basically. And like, I think we all know who I'm talking, Jeff Benson of Circa. He allows his personality like to come out and be shown, right? The late, great Dave Sharapin, right, who passed away over the weekend, sadly. He let his personality be shown. Roxy Roxborough sometimes lets his personality be shown. But so many other people kind of hide behind the veneer. And again, for some bettors, I understand, like you can't like be all that, out there. And, obviously I understand for the, the C-suite types, but you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to be asking what they had for breakfast. I'm going to be asking what's on their Spotify playlist. And I want to get to know these people. I want I want to kind of put a little bit more of a human face on an industry that is just begging for that to happen. Because again, I don't care what side of the industry you're on. If you're in this industry, your personality is probably, outsized, right? I mean, how could you be in this industry and not have an outsized personality? I want to show that.
What did you have for breakfast, Jeff?
So far, coffee, a peanut butter toast, and a Canada Dry seltzer. You?
Very nice. Black coffee.
Yeah, there you go. Black's the only way, by the way.
I'm kind of boring like that. I'm trying to add more protein to my diet, but I'm so far not succeeding in that. What's on your Spotify playlist?
Well, what's not on my Spotify playlist? I mean, I'll tell you what I've been listening to lately is a band called Goose. You ever hear of this band Goose? They're like a hippy dippy jam band kind of thing. They've been around a few years apparently, but I just happened to run into a song of theirs, and now that's kind of like standard going through on my playlist right now. Just a lot of Goose. When I find something I like, I dive in for about 3 months, and then like 6 years from now, I'm like, oh yeah, shit, Goose. I forgot all about them. I should listen to them again.
By the way, the point that you're trying to make, I completely agree with it. One of my frustrations as a host is these people would come on and they have to give their polished answer. And to your point, a few guests let their personality come across like Jeff did. But by and large, most of the people that come on the podcast are pretty guarded, and the interesting stories comes out before and after the podcast or when you see each other at a conference. And it's a real shame because I think it would make it a lot more richer. It'd humanize people a lot more. But when you have a mic in front of you, people tend to be quite guarded. So as a listener, I would find that very interesting if you have a way to disarm people and get people to talk about their personal lives a little bit more. One of the things I'm involved with is an organization called YPO. And one of the cornerstones of YPO is this idea of a monthly forum where you meet with other CEOs and you talk in this confidential environment. And the things I've heard in this confidential environment, I can't share the specifics of it, but it just humanizes people. From the outside, as humans, we make so many assumptions about this person, that person, is successful. They have no problems. They're able to do this, but everybody has their own pathologies and things that they're dealing with. And if you can figure out a way to break down people and humanize them, the world doesn't seem as scary as it might do otherwise.
I agree 100%. I just did an interview with the CEO of Mindway AI, whose name I'm going to butcher, Rasmus. He's from Denmark. Anyway, so we're talking about Mindway AI is a company that they are creating, AI tools for responsible gambling, which is cool and interesting. But, at the same time, like, it's a little bit dry. And then, we get to talking a little bit. And remember, this guy's from Denmark, right? And I'm sitting here in New Jersey. And he says, "Oh, do you like Bruce Springsteen?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course. Like, you're contractually obligated to like Bruce Springsteen if you live in New Jersey." And as it turns out, this guy in Denmark is like the biggest Springsteen fan you're going to find. He's been to like 40 shows. He became a fan of him because he saw him in the We Are the World video. And we just get to talking. And so, yeah, I wrote a story. I did an interview with him about responsible gambling. But the interesting part was him talking about Springsteen. That's exactly the kind of stuff that I want to do. I'd be much happier, right? And I think listeners will be a lot happier if I get Rasmus on and we spend a minute or two talking about his business and 40 minutes talking Springsteen. I think that's more interesting. I really do. I mean, again, I say that as a consumer. Listen, when I listen to a podcast, I'm a fan of, let's say, John Mulaney, or I'm a fan of whoever, right? I could listen to the podcast, and if they're just talking about, their show, they're this, they're that, whatever, it's like, okay, it's interesting, but like, whatever. But what I'm interested in, again, I want to know, you eat Captain Crunch. That's pretty cool. That makes it just it humanizes. Not only does it humanize, but it just makes it more interesting. Listen, there is no shortage of content in the world. Like, my God, like we're overwhelmed with content, and to cut through the noise, I think personality wins. If I'm laughing, if I'm doing this podcast and if I'm laughing and my guest is laughing, then I have to assume that the listener is laughing. Without being putting too fine a point on it, I think we could all use a little bit of laughter in our lives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I personally, speaking for myself, I'd love to hear what people eat for breakfast and what's on their Spotify playlist. I think it's interesting to see into, what people are like in their personal lives as well as their professional lives. So completely agree about that. Why don't you tee up, do you have broad opinions about the sports betting industry? Like, what's your perspective on it? It sounds like you're what I might call a super fan in sports. Like, do you come at it from like the super fandom journalism angle, or are you into the money side? Are you into the math side? Like, how would you describe your relationship to sports betting?
When I started out as a columnist at the Trentonian newspaper, this was about like 2001. Okay. So this is a long time ago. And I remember the very first column I wrote, when my boss finally gave me a chance to write a column, the very first column I wrote, I wish I could tell you what it was about. I don't remember, but I have no idea. But what I do remember is this part of it. And this I sound like I'm bragging, but let me get through it. The janitor at the newspaper, John, big gruff guy, just like gruff, came up to me that day. He said, "Oh, that was a great fucking column you wrote today. It was really fucking funny." I'm like, "Oh, thanks, John. I really appreciate it." Later that same day, a state senator by the name of Peter Inverso called me up and said, "Jeff, that column you wrote today was very good. It was very funny." Right then and there, I'm like, all right, I think I'm doing something right. I got the senator and I got the janitor both saying, "Hey man, good job." Right. So I said, all right, I'm doing something right. As time goes on, fast forward 6, 7, 8 years, Bill Simmons is at ESPN and doing his thing. And so many people will come up to me and say, "Man, you write just like Bill Simmons." And I'm thinking, listen, motherfucker, Bill Simmons writes just like me. I was first. I was doing this shtick before Simmons, And I think what it turns out, I think, me and Bill Simmons are of the same, socioeconomic East Coast background, right? And I think we both kind of have a similar style. And that style, I like to think of myself, and I think Simmons probably used to think of himself this way before he became as big as he is. And I'm not comparing myself to Bill Simmons, so let's just stop there. But I think the idea that I come into most of my work, gambling and otherwise, is like I try to position myself as the ultimate outsider's insider, right? Where I want, I have more access, obviously, than like the average person, just by virtue of what I do for a living. I've obviously have more access to people in the industry. But at the same time, no one is going to confuse me for an expert on any one aspect of the industry. And I don't want to be, sometimes I don't want to be an expert, but I'm just not an expert. That's not how I work. I have long prided myself on being, miles wide and inches deep on just about every topic, under the sun. And I think the same comes through with gambling. And I'm interested. Well, I take it back. I'm going to say I'm not most interested in anything. I'm interested a little bit in everything, right? And I want to, and that's how I position myself. I want to be like the voice of the outsider, right? Of the average person, but who has like the ability to say, all right, let me get this guy on the phone. Let me get that guy on email and let's explain this to me. I can't tell you how many interviews when I'm doing an article, and I'm sure I'll be doing the same thing on this podcast, where I tell them the subject. I'm like, listen, let's just assume, because we're not wrong here, that I'm a fucking idiot on this. So let's explain this to me real truly like I'm 5 years old. So that way I can, get my few inches deep, and then we could go from there. When I do that, that's how I end up on talking Springsteen for 40 minutes.
Sounds like a good start. Do you have any hopes for the industry? Like, there's a lot going on right now between prediction markets and state rights and cheating and parlays and sweepstakes.
Well, all right, my basic hope, which is like, it's like a 4-year-old on Christmas morning kind of hope, is like, it would be nice if we could all just agree that if you are putting money up in hopes to win more money, it's gambling, right? Let's start there. Let's just all agree on that point, right? Because, listen, we go back to DFS 10 years ago and, it's not gambling. Okay. Sweepstakes, it's not gambling. Prediction markets, it's not gambling. Of course it's gambling. I mean, come on. This is gambling. My all-time dream is that there is like a nationwide gambling czar who says, are you putting money down to win money? It's gambling, and this is how we're going to regulate it, and we're going to be done with it. Of course, if we do that, 95% of the industry is out of a job because, what are you going to do, right? So that's never going to happen. The prediction market thing, obviously, is the most interesting thing happening right now. Sweepstakes seems like it's a little bit on the ropes based on what's happening out there with California and other states, obviously. Prediction markets is the big question. What's very interesting to me is that it certainly seems as if the current administration is like all in, and they seem okay with prediction markets, not the least reason because a certain president's son is on the board of seemingly every one of them, right?
Oh, yeah? I didn't know that. That's funny. Oh.
Right? But here's the thing. When I think everyone is kind of in agreement that this is going to end up in the courts and it's going to end up probably at the Supreme Court level, right? And he brought up states' rights. And so PASPA gets overturned by the court, which was, leaning conservative at the time, because of it was a states' right issue, right? That this is states' rights, states' rights, states' rights. The states get to choose. This court is even more states' rights than it was, 7 years ago. But are they going to come out and say that this is a states' rights issue and say no, and say, yes, New Jersey, yes, California, yes, every other state? You can ban Polymarket. You could ban Kalshi. I have a hard time seeing that happen, but who knows? The one thing that I know for sure, is that anybody in this industry who knows where this industry is going to be in 6 months is full of shit. That's the one thing I've definitely learned.
Death and taxes, I guess you can be sure about. I think going to your point about can we all just agree this is gambling, I don't think we can. And the reason I don't think we can is because gambling, I think by and large, is an emotion. There's not like a mathematical definition of gambling. Gambling is a motivation for why somebody makes a trade. And that's why I think it's such a squidgely, I'm going to make up a word, columnist guy. Squidgely, it's such a amorphous concept because you can be gambling on a house, you could be gambling on stocks, you could be investing in sports bet, you can be arbitraging a sports bet. Like the gambling refers more to the motivation of the person that's risking the money, not really about the mathematical equation that they're partaking in. And I think that's why it's such a intellectually confusing concept of why should gambling be regulated like what we call traditional gambling, sports betting and the like, be regulated this way, but stock trading and option trading is regulated that way, when essentially it's the same thing. So I don't know. Do you kind of see that argument that, the line is blurry between stock trading?
One person's gambling is another person's investing, right? So I get that. But at minimum, can we just agree that if like you're playing a machine that has cherries, watermelons, and jokers in it, that's a slot machine? And can we all agree that if like you're putting money on the Chiefs to cover against the Giants, that's sports betting? Like right now, we can't agree on that.
You would say that there's like a financial, by the way, I'm just having an intellectual argument with you. Obviously, I have a point of view, but like you would say a weather contract would be a bona fide financial contract, right? So like if I'm a soybean farmer and I want to sell rain contracts that, whatever the case may be, everybody would kind of nod their head along and say that makes sense. So why couldn't you make that same argument for the Chiefs?
Well, right. So like, the bartender, the guy who owns a bar in Kansas City, like the Chiefs are doing shitty, like his bar is going to suffer. Like, that's the argument?
Or if I print T-shirts, or I own a parking lot next to the stadium, or whatever.
Yes, you can make the argument. To me, it's, is the word specious? Am I using that word correctly? It's a stretch to me. It's a stretch. I mean, because while we can make that argument, we also can be pretty confident. And I'm not, just to be clear, I am not anti-prediction market. I think more gambling and more outs for a gambler, for the consumer, the better. I want to be clear about that. But to say that, so while it is true that you can make that argument for the Chiefs, if we're being honest with ourselves, nobody is sitting and actually making that argument, like in real life. You know what I mean? Like for every, event contract that the prediction markets are taking on a sporting event, I'm going to go out on a limb and say we're talking a point with a bunch of zeros and then a one after it for people that are doing it as an economic hedge.
Yeah, I totally, I get your common sense argument. It's really hard to quantify what's in the head of the participant, whether they're a speculator, whether they're an investor. For example, on SmartKits, a huge percentage of our customer base are arbors. So they're basically taking shitty prices in the bookmaker and they're arbing it with us. And I think under most definitions, nobody would consider them gamblers. They're much more akin to investors. And so like this idea of the motivation of the person that's placing the risk is really important as to this definition of, is it speculative and therefore gambling, or is it accretive and therefore investing? And should those be regulated differently? It's a complicated question. I think I used to be a stock trader, and, back in the day, it was basically, all the brokers and rich people that would be trading. And then, when I started, it was the beginning of the day trading revolution. And I think the percentage of stock trading from the retail has just gone up and up, and institutional trading has gone down and down. At some point, I think a lot of people would agree a lot of day trading have a gambling or speculation motivation and not an investment motivation. And, maybe the reverse is true. Maybe stock trading should be regulated more like sports betting. I don't know. But I do think that sports betting is not that dissimilar, if not dissimilar at all, from regular investing. Therefore, I think even though it feels kind of, I'm going to use that made up word again, squidgely, I don't know what to say. It feels wrong that Kalshi should be able to do sports betting under a CFTC license. When you intellectualize it, I don't think it's not that different from trading a wheat future or from trading an option.
So as I said earlier, anyone who tells you what this industry is going to look like in 6 months is full of shit. What I didn't say is anyone who tells you what this industry is going to look like in 30 years isn't full of shit, because I have an idea of what the industry is going to look like in 30 years. And I think it's going to look much more like you just explained, right? I think what we look at as gambling today, so using the stock market, we don't look at the stock market as gambling. Everyone, like when, if you're playing the $20,000 pyramid and they say stock market, you say investing, and you say sports betting, you say gambling, right? Then Dick Clark comes over and pats you on the back. But I think that's going to change. I think we're going to see it all as more falling under the investment banner. And the reason I think that is because this generation coming up now, the teenagers, the 20-somethings, I don't think that they see a difference, right? I think, the Robin Hoodization of investing, quote unquote, being bombarded with ads. I mean, my son's 16, has zero interest in any of this. But we talk, and like on his, his TikTok, his Instagram, it's just chock full of ads for casino, for gambling, for this, for that, and the other, as well as for like Robinhood and things like that. And so I just think that, and they've grown up in this world of loot boxes, and like even like the surprise packet, like the Lego figurines in a surprise packet, they have been brought up in a very pro gambling world. Roblox, they're gambling and don't even know it, right? And so I think that is just going to really cross over into like mainstream America when they become us, right? They're not going to look at any of this as gambling. It's going to be looked at, I think, as investing. I'm going to invest in the Chiefs today. and I think it's going to have, it's going to look a lot different, it's just in tone, basically. It'll be the same, but I think, the way people look at it will change as the years go on.
I agree with you on that 30-year thing. Like, I mean, it's no secret that finance, sports betting, crypto, it's all going to convert, banking, ETFs, it's all going to converge to one thing. And the lines between all the different forms of trading is not going to be, it's going to be very small, if non-existent, in 30 years. Absolutely agree with that. Well, I'm very excited to see what you come up with. And I love your spin on it. And I think your ability, I came at it from an industry, obviously I'm an industry insider. I think your outsider, insider take on things can give this podcast a really nice spin. And I'm very much looking forward to all the episodes that you put out there. Before I sign off, I'd like to thank Jake for founding the podcast and trusting me with handing it over. I'd also like to thank Jesse, Thomas, and Ara for producing it. For those of you that have never been involved in a podcast, there's an enormous amount of work finding guests, editing, publishing, all these pieces that get added up to make a very successful podcast. They've worked tirelessly in the background to push the success of this podcast. And I want to thank the listeners who have listened and stuck with me over the years. To your point, Jeff, the janitor and the state senator, I've gotten people that have stopped me at random saying they've listened to this podcast. And, from the top of the CEOs to people who are just starting out in their career and following the industry for the first time. And it's been very heartwarming to know that the work that you do, people resonate with it. And the people that have followed this podcast, I really appreciate you sticking with it and sticking with me and giving me a chance. What I will be doing in the future, I still have a day job. I'm still a CEO of Smarkets. One of the reasons I wanted to sign off this podcast is I used to be a developer. I studied computer science. I'm extremely excited about the prospects of AI and what that is enabling technology companies to do. And I'm trying to implement that internally in Smarkets, build new products, move faster. And so I'm trying to clear out my week so that I have more heads down time with AI because things are moving so fast and it's been tough to keep up on everything as well as put together a great podcast. So I thought it was time to hand over the reins while I go back down, heads down, trying to build new sports betting products. So I'm sad to be signing this off. It's been a big part of my life for the last 3 years. It's been a big part of a new experience for me. I did radio in college, like I said, but putting myself out there week in and week out, it's been a learning experience and definitely a worthwhile experience. So I wish you the best, Jeff. Do the podcast justice, and I hope you grow the audience. And I'll be listening with my Spotify when I'm at the gym and wishing you to really dig into the breakfast and Spotify preferences of those powerful people that you will be interviewing.
Will do, man. Thanks for entrusting me with this. And we'll have you, I think I can make room, have you back on the podcast in a month or two.
I will join with pleasure if you'll have me.
Awesome.
Great. Well, thanks very much. Thank you for all the listeners, and I will see you on the radio later.
The Business of Betting podcast is presented by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming industry. 4 out of the top 5 U.S. operators personalize player experiences with Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming industry. Learn more about Optimove by requesting a demo at optimove.com/businessofbetting. And if you like what you see, you will get your first month free.